Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. You're very welcome to today's online press briefing. Without further ado, I will give the floor to Michel Barnier.
It's okay. Merci, Dan.
Thank you, Dan. Good afternoon to each of you and every one of you. For many reasons, I am very pleased to see you, even virtually. Thanks to technology, I hope that each and every one of you is in good form, as is the case for those nearest and dearest to you. And I'd also like to thank you for your attention in this very particular period. Indeed, we are experiencing a very serious moment from a human and health, economic and social perspective, and also in political terms. The health crisis has always claimed over 100,000 deaths in Europe, 170,000 across the world. And today, of course, in finding you and in returning to this press room, my thoughts go first and foremost towards those who have lost someone dear to them, and to those in hospital, very often in difficult conditions, and to those who in some form or other are affected by this virus. Let me add a personal note.
All the best in your recovery, Prime Minister. Dans cette période de crise,
in this period of crisis, the energy of governments and European institutions, and of course all the European institutions and institutions in general, is focused on a response to the crisis, and that of course applies to our institution, the European Commission, and our President Ursula von der Leyen. Our primary collective responsibility is to contain the virus, to take care of the sick, to look after those caring for them, and also to manage the economic and social consequences of this crisis. That was the objective, of course, of the European Council, which met yesterday and which was chaired by Michel. Lastly, we need to prepare for recovery by drawing all the lessons, and there are many of those, from what we are currently experiencing, both individually and collectively. So these are now the priorities. This is the absolute priority in the current situation. That's why there is a legitimate question, and that is whether the negotiations that we've been dealing with this week with the British side, this has taken up the whole of this week since Monday, every day, might be rather out of phase with what's going on. I even read an article from one of your colleagues describing this negotiation as surreal. I cannot agree with that term, even though I do understand that there is something that's out of kilter here. There are realities, and in terms of those realities, we have to apply realism. That's why it's important that we come together to pursue these negotiations, which are complex and extraordinary. It's often been said they are extraordinarily complex. It is our duty to be realistic in terms of a number of deadlines which are set out in law and which are imposed upon us. The 30th of June, just a few weeks from now, are we going to decide whether or not, before that date, and on the basis of a joint decision with the British, to extend the transition period. This possibility, of course, is provided for in the withdrawal agreement. Second date that we have to look at quite clearly with open eyes is the 31st of December. That is the day set for economic Brexit after political Brexit took place at the beginning of this year. When we come to this economic Brexit, which will bring about important and definitive changes in many areas, will at that stage the UK leave the single market and the customs union with an agreement between it and the European Union, or without an agreement? So what's important here is a number of consequences and the shock that might affect many companies and consumers. And then there's realism. Within the middle of an economic shock, which is terrible and which is around the corner because of the coronavirus. We need to see whether we can come up with a smart agreement to cushion the shock that I just mentioned, and which at any rate will be linked to the UK exit from the single market and the customs union. And it is realistic to ask that question, to remind you of those deadlines and to come up with responses. Let me add, in parallel to the negotiations, that there's a fourth deadline, the 31st of December, and that is that there has to be an operational implementation of a withdrawal agreement by that date. The withdrawal agreement affects 4.5 million people on both sides, citizens in terms of their rights being protected. We have a number of commitments we have to respect, and right from the outset, one priority has been priority and stability in Northern Ireland and in Ireland. That's a priority for me. Now, at the time I'm speaking to you, the British government has told us and confirmed at this round that it would reject any extension to the transition period. Even though, even in the agreement that we struck, this possibility of extension by 1 or 2 years does exist if we decide jointly so to do before the 30th of June this year. We note that choice. My recommendation is therefore that we work seriously between now and the month of June, and as we have to come up with a joint response, we need to think carefully about that response, taking account in the negotiations of the economic situation and the consequences of that decision. In the immediate, the consequence of this decision on the part of the United Kingdom is that time is short. More than ever, the clock is ticking. More than ever. We have 8 months, scarcely 8 months before us to complete 3 areas of work simultaneously. Firstly, we have to ensure that the withdrawal agreement is properly implemented, as I just mentioned. Secondly, we have to prepare for the economic negative consequences at the end of the transition period. There will be consequences, there will be change. Thirdly, we have to negotiate a future partnership and succeed in striking a partnership agreement between the European Union and the United Kingdom, which will make it possible to limit those negative consequences. Ladies and gentlemen, more than ever, we have to start making progress together, and we need to move forward in a constructive fashion. That is why I would point out it is important that this week, without undue delay, we resume those negotiations, even at distance. We were able to resume that negotiations thanks to technology. 40 or so video conference calls have taken place this week, and even though it's not the same thing, even though indeed it's easier in a negotiation, it's easier to talk to each other in the wings of a negotiation, and that's not always possible via video, we have nonetheless worked well, and at this stage I'd like to thank the teams on both sides for being available, for their constructive work, and I'd like particularly to thank David Frost for his professionalism, his frankness and his determination. On our side, of course, I would like to thank the whole task force team, which is working extremely hard, and I'd also like to thank the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and on her behalf I'd like to thank all the services and all the Directorates General in the Commission which are fully committed, involving the Secretariat General, the Cabinet of the President, the Legal Service and the External Action Service. Ladies and gentlemen, the UK has affirmed once again this week its wish to make substantial progress, tangible progress, between now and June. And we're on the same wavelength on this, and we respect the same timetable. That means that we need genuine progress by June if, at the end of this year, we want to strike an agreement which is commensurate to the level of our economic interdependence and geographical proximity.
On the 18th of March, we sent to the UK a proposal for a full legal text with a view to this ambitious partnership in economic and security areas. The text is available online. It's not always easy to read. It's 350 pages. It's a lot of pages, but it's a complete text, which is the translation, a precise translation of my mandate. It's the legal mandate that the 27 member states, the institutions, the European Parliament set me. This text is a text for negotiation. It's not to be taken or left by the.
Even in a short time frame, it is possible to strike a complete agreement and treaty on all the subjects for our future partnership. And on this side, the UK has sent in proposals on certain subjects, not on everything. I simply regret the fact that because of the rule of confidentiality that they have insisted on, we cannot share with you and with Member States or the European Parliament this text. We cannot share it with you for the moment.
These last weeks and the preceding weeks have been ways of understanding through technical discussion our respective positions. Now, if we want tangible progress, which is what we want, we have to move beyond that. We have to go beyond clarification stages. We need a more politically dynamic process, generating proposals to build steps towards a compromise and an agreement. For the second round and for future rounds, and in this round, our aim was and will be parallel progress on all subjects, including the most difficult ones in the negotiation. That was my mandate, which the 27 gave me. That is also the requirement of the EP. My responsibility as an EU negotiator is to say the truth to you. Our objective for tangible progress in parallel on all subjects, I'm afraid this has only been partially, very partially met this week. This round enabled us to identify areas where, at least on a technical level, we're getting closer to the UK. However, the UK did not wish to commit seriously on a number of fundamental points. These are not points we just came up with. They are written quite precisely in the political declaration, which is in the withdrawal treaty here, joined to it. It was discussed line by line with Boris Johnson and his team, point by point. It was approved, including by the House of Commons and the EP on our side, when the withdrawal agreement was ratified. What is written in this text needs to be implemented in a serious, objective, legal way in the negotiation. This is not the case now yet in a number of areas. I regret that, and it worries me.
We cannot accept to make selective progress on a limited set of issues only. We need to make progress on all issues in parallel. We need to find solutions on the most difficult topics. The UK cannot refuse to extend the transition and, at the same time, slow down discussions on important areas. There are 4 areas in particular on which the progress this week was disappointing. Number 1, the level playing field. The UK negotiators keep repeating that we are negotiating as sovereign equals. As sovereigns, each side must be able to decide with full sovereignty on the conditions of access to our respective markets. That's fine. But the reality of this negotiation is to find the best possible relationship between a market of 66 million consumers on the one side of the channel and a market of 450 million consumers on the other side. That is a reality. Our free trade agreement with zero tariff, zero quotas on all products would mean unprecedented access for the UK as a third country to this market of 450 million consumers and citizens, and a market that is on the UK's doorstep. Our economic partnership would be broad and comprehensive, encompassing trade in goods and services, including transport, fisheries and energy. Our offer shows the EU's level of ambition, but we must be equally ambitious in guaranteeing high social and high environmental standards. We must be equally ambitious in preventing unfair trade distortions and unjustified competitive advantages, for instance, on state aid and relevant tax measures. This week, the UK failed to engage substantially on these topics. It argued that our positions are too far apart to reach an agreement. It also denounced the basic premise that economic interconnectedness and geographic proximity require robust guarantees. Yet again, this is what we agreed with Boris Johnson in our joint political declaration. This is what the UK Parliament approved after the December elections at the same time that the withdrawal agreement. Let me remind on this point one thing, what I said already, and what my mandate clearly states. Ladies and gentlemen, there will be no ambitious trade deal without an ambitious level playing field on open and fair competition. The second point on which we remain very far apart is the overall governance of our future partnership. The EU proposed a single framework for the UK and the EU to manage jointly and efficiently all areas of our future relationship. The UK continues to insist on a number of separate agreements, each with their separate governance arrangements. This leads to duplication, inefficiencies, and a lack of transparency in the application and enforcement of the partnership, which is in nobody's interest. In the single governance framework that we are proposing, there are three important points for us that the UK currently refuses. First, as a basis of our cooperation, we need to refer to common values such as democracy, rule of law and human rights, counter-terrorism, or the fight against climate change as an essential principle. Those values are standard in all our international agreements. Second, our agreements must foresee the UK's continued adherence to the European Convention of Human Rights, which should be given effect in domestic law so that individuals can rely on it. This is particularly important in the field of law enforcement and internal security. Third, the partnership cannot deliver on the high level of ambition expressed in the political declaration without the UK recognising the role of the Court of Justice, the European Court of Justice, when we use concepts of union law, especially for the exchange of personal data. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, this is of particular importance when it comes to our future police and judicial cooperation in criminal matters. And this is our third concern after this second round. We both want a close relationship here, but we face problems. The UK refuses to provide firm guarantees rather than vague principles on fundamental rights and individual freedoms. It insists on lowering current standards and deviating from agreed mechanism of data protection, and this creates serious limitations for our future security partnership. The UK chose to be a third country. It is its choice. As a consequence, it will not be treated as a member state. We must take this fact as our starting point. However, the partnership that we envisage is still unprecedented for a non-Schengen third country that rejects the freedom of people, both due to the number of fields covered and the closeness of cooperation proposed. And finally, we made no progress on fisheries. On this essential topic, the UK has not put forward a legal text. We have made no tangible progress, despite the political declaration stating that we should make our best endeavours to reach an agreement by July. This is necessary to provide sufficient clarity for EU and UK fishermen and also for all business linked to fisheries. Ladies and gentlemen, the EU will not agree to any future economic partnership that does not include a balanced, sustainable and long-term solution on fisheries. That should be crystal clear to the UK. I have spoken several times about June. Why? Because we agreed with Boris Johnson in the political declaration, once again, to hold a high-level conference in June to take stock of our progress in the negotiations. Before that, we have only 2 rounds of negotiations left in the weeks of the 11th of May and the week of the 1st of June. We must use these 2 rounds to make real, tangible progress across all areas, including all those I have just raised. June will be also an occasion to take stock on what real progress the UK has made for the implementation of the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland. Indeed, with just 8 months to go before the end of the transition period, it is urgent to take the necessary measures for the correct implementation of the withdrawal agreement. The first meeting of the Joint Committee took place on the 30th of March, co-chaired by the Vice President of the Commission, Maroš Šefčovič, and Michael Gove. In follow-up of this meeting, the Specialised Committee on the Protocol on Ireland, Northern Ireland, will take place next week on the 30th of April. We need clear evidence that the UK is advancing with the introduction of the agreed customs procedures for goods entering Northern Ireland. We need clear evidence that the UK will be able to carry out all necessary sanitary and phytosanitary controls, as well as other regulatory checks on goods entering Northern Ireland from outside the EU as of January 2021 in 8 months' time. 8 months' time. Indeed, I reminded David Frost again during this round that the phase full of effective implementation of the withdrawal agreement is absolutely central to our ongoing negotiations. This is a line that we will hold together with the Vice President Maroš Šefčovič in particular on Ireland and Northern Ireland, but also on citizen rights on both sides, obviously. A new partnership with the UK can only be built on trust, and this requires that already agreed commitments are applied correctly. Voilà, mesdames et messieurs.
So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry I took a bit long, but it was an opportunity, when I see you again in this way, to do a full stock take, to do it calmly, frankly, but in a determined way, as we usually have been and will remain to be frank and determined. I spoke frankly of the difficulties ahead, serious difficulties. I still think now that these are difficulties we can get beyond over the coming months if there is political will, if there is realism, and if there is mutual respect. To go back to what I said earlier and where we stand now, I would also add, given today's reality, that the health crisis, the economic and social crisis we're going through now, place upon us even further responsibilities as Europeans and as the UK side to work together to build a sustainable and ambitious partnership over the coming months. Thank you very much, Mr. Barnier.